The 24-year-old German U-boat commander shifts nervously in his chair as high-ranking British and American officers bark at him across the table. The war is over, yet Heinz Schäffer sits in an interrogation room, facing men who have traveled thousands of miles for answers. Schäffer's submarine should have surrendered in Europe months ago. Instead, it's halfway around the world, and a third of its crew is missing. It's all very suspicious, and the Allied officers think they know why. They've had enough of games. Taking a deep drag of his cigarette, the lead interrogator stares the trembling German in the eye and yells, quote, "You have hidden Hitler." On May 1st, 1945, German radio made a stunning announcement. The previous day, Adolf Hitler had fallen in his bunker. The larger-than-life, almost mythical character who had defined the Nazi movement since its inception was apparently no more. While the world gradually processed the news, Hitler's successor as head of state, Admiral Karl Dönitz, began preparing for Germany's surrender. On May 4th, he ordered all remaining German U-boats to cease hostilities and turn themselves over to the Allies, telling them, quote, "Men of the submarines, without breaking your martial courage, you lay down your arms after a heroic fight without equal." It was a bitter pill for the men who had survived the Battle of the Atlantic, but most obeyed. Over 150 U-boats surrendered as ordered, their crews filing into prisoner of war camps across Britain and North America. Others chose a different path. In what was known as Operation Regenbogen, meaning rainbow, over 230 U-boat commanders refused to hand their vessels over to the enemy. Instead, they sailed into deep water, opened the seacocks, and sent their submarines to the bottom while they escaped in lifeboats. It was a final gesture of defiance. The Allies could have Germany, but they would not have her U-boats. Yet for some reason, a handful of German submarines did neither. They didn't surrender, they didn't scuttle. They simply vanished beneath the waves. Perhaps they refused to accept defeat, or perhaps they were carrying something so valuable that they had to keep going at all costs. Among the U-boats that mysteriously remained active was U-977. U-977 had been laid down at the Blohm+Voss shipyard in Hamburg in July 1942 and commissioned the following May under the command of Oberlieutenant Hans Lieblich. She was a member of the Type 7C class, the workhorse of the Kriegsmarine's underwater fleet, with more produced than any other submarine class in history. They weren't the biggest, fastest, or most heavily armed submarines, but they were reliable, relatively cheap to build, and generally effective in their intended role, attacking Allied merchant shipping in order to cripple the enemy war effort. Yet while many Type 7Cs had achieved great success, U-977's early career had been far from distinguished. During workup exercises in the Baltic, the submarine was involved in at least 3 ramming incidents, collisions serious enough that German naval authorities deemed the damage to her pressure hull too severe for frontline combat duty. Instead, she was relegated to training operations, spending nearly 2 years as a schoolboat based in the Baltic Sea. She was the last U-boat anyone would have picked for a crucial mission, unless they deliberately wanted a vessel that would attract little attention. Then, in early 1945, U-977 had entered the Hamburg yards for a significant refit. On February 20th, she'd finally been fitted with a snorkel, a tube-like device that would allow her diesel engines to run while submerged, dramatically extending her underwater endurance. It was a technology that had transformed U-boat operations, allowing submarines to cross entire oceans without fully surfacing. Just as the German war effort was falling apart, this humble training vessel had suddenly been given an upgrade that would drastically transform her capabilities. In March, U-977 would undergo another change, this time a change of commander. At just 24 years old, Oberlieutenant Zursee Heinz Schäffer was among the youngest U-boat commanders in the Kriegsmarine and had never led a submarine into combat before. Unlike notorious commanders such as Erich Topp and Adelbert Schnee, who had each sent tens of thousands of tons of Allied shipping to the ocean floor and who were now badly wanted for capture, Schäffer was an inexperienced unknown who nobody would be looking for. In April, as enemy forces had been sweeping their way across Germany, U-977 had set off on her first patrol. After making a stop at the Norwegian port of Kristiansand on May 2nd, she had sailed west toward the waters off the northern coast of Scotland. When the order had come through to surrender, U-977 had been just miles from the coast of Britain. She could have turned herself in easily and quickly. Yet instead, she pushed on one of the longest voyages a U-boat had ever attempted. U-977 made her way around Britain and into the Atlantic, heading south. Anyone observing might have suspected she was bound for neutral Spain or Portugal. Franco Spain, in particular, had maintained friendly relations with Nazi Germany throughout the war. U-573 had successfully interned there in 1942 and had been sold to the Spanish Navy. It would have been a logical, safe choice for a crew simply trying to avoid Allied captivity. But U-977 didn't stop. She continued south, passing the Iberian Peninsula entirely. As she passed the Canary Islands without stopping, any idea that Schäffer and his men might be seeking safety on Spanish territory dissipated. For 2 months, she continued south through the Atlantic along the west coast of Africa. The crew endured suffocating heat in the cramped steel tube as they traveled primarily submerged using the snorkel. When aircraft were spotted, which happened multiple times, U-977 would dive deeper and wait in silent darkness until the threat passed. Wherever she was headed, survival was paramount and was worth suffering for. On July 14th, after over 2 months at sea, she surfaced near the Cape Verde Islands, a Portuguese possession off West Africa. It was a brief pause in an extraordinary voyage. U-977 had presumably spent 66 consecutive days underwater from Norway to Cape Verde. If true, it was the second longest submerged passage ever recorded at the time. Yet it would be a brief pause. 4 hours later, U-977 was on her way once more. Within days, she'd crossed the equator. It was clear that Schäffer was on a mission and would stop at nothing to reach his destination. Meanwhile, a shocking theory was emerging. Hitler had not really met his end in his Berlin bunker on April 30th. Doubts about the veracity of the Führer's demise had existed since it had first been reported. The Soviets, who controlled the bunker site, had just found charred remains in June. The Red Army's Marshal Zhukov told reporters that no corpse, quote, could be definitively identified as that of Hitler. Even Stalin himself publicly expressed uncertainty about the official version of events surrounding Hitler's fate, telling U.S. envoy Harry Hopkins, quote, he's hidden somewhere. The question was where. Soon enough, an unexpected event would give rise to one possible explanation. In the early hours of July 10th, over 2 months since the end of the war in Europe, port authorities at Mar del Plata, Argentina, received a shocking message over the radio, quote, German submarine. U-530, commanded by 25-year-old Oberlieutenant Otto Wehrmuth, had arrived after a mysterious voyage from Europe. But what was he doing off the coast of Argentina? Argentina was a natural choice for German forces seeking protection after the war. Despite the risks involved in traveling so far from home, its distance from major Allied power bases made it appealing, and its long, largely unpatrolled coastline made it easy for ships and submarines to approach undetected. Immigration policies were lax. There was already a considerable German community living there, and the country had remained neutral throughout most of World War II, joining the Allies only at the very end of the conflict, more as a token gesture to stay on side with the victors than a genuine symbol of hostility toward the Nazi regime. Many Germans who had fought for Hitler, such as Wehrmuth and his crew, believed Argentina would treat them sympathetically and considered going there to be the best chance of preserving their freedom. Nevertheless, any foreign military vessel arriving unannounced off the Argentine coast could expect to be thoroughly investigated, and U-530 was no exception. When Argentine authorities boarded the submarine, they found the crew intact, but several crucial items missing. The submarine's logbook had been destroyed, along with other sensitive documents. Most suspiciously, a lifeboat was unaccounted for. Under interrogation, Wehrmuth insisted his crew had made no stops along the way, and that no passengers had been aboard. But his story had gaps, and his refusal to provide details about their exact route only deepened suspicions. Details of the strange appearance of U-530 soon reached the Buenos Aires-based Hungarian journalist Ladislav Szabo, who rapidly began trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle. Within days, he published his conclusion in the Argentine newspaper Kritika. The Germans were using their remaining U-boats to send high-ranking Nazi personnel to Argentina, including Hitler himself. While many dismissed Szabo's theory as sensationalist nonsense, others thought there could be some truth to it. Before long, rumors abounded, with several sources in Argentina claiming to have sighted the Führer and his girlfriend Eva Braun in disguise. The FBI investigated a lead regarding an Argentinian who said he had personally met Hitler on the Valdez Peninsula after he'd been dropped off there by a U-boat in May. Though many of these claims seemed highly implausible, they showed that Szabo had planted the seed of an idea that would refuse to go away. On August 17th, Lieutenant Hector Migone was conducting a routine patrol in his Condor aircraft off the Argentine coast when he spotted something that made him bank sharply for a closer look. There was something below the surface, and it was heading directly toward the Mar del Plata. When his radio message reached the port authorities, there was a moment of stunned disbelief. Less than 6 weeks had passed since U-530's sudden arrival at this very harbor. Surely this couldn't be another German U-boat. Yet that's exactly what it was. At 11:05 a.m., emerging from the waves came U-977. After Oberlieutenant Heinz Schäffer requested permission to surrender, Argentine naval officers boarded the submarine and took Schäffer and his 31 crew members into custody for preliminary interrogation. The Argentine interrogators began piecing together U-977's story. Schäffer explained that after Germany's surrender, 16 married members of the crew had expressed a desire to go home to their families, so he dropped them off back in Norway before continuing with the rest of the crew across the Atlantic. He claimed that their decision to attempt to escape to South America had been partially inspired by a Nazi propaganda broadcast by Joseph Goebbels, which said that the Allies' Morgenthau Plan, the proposal to severely limit Germany's industrial capabilities after the war, would turn the country into a quote-unquote goat pasture, and that German men would face slavery and even sterilization. Though, of course, this would not happen, it seemed reasonable enough that young men who had grown up under Nazism would believe Goebbels' message and act accordingly. Schäffer's story may have been incredible, but so far it seemed believable. But as the Argentines inspected the submarine more closely, questions began to mount. The boat was still carrying all 10 of her torpedoes, every single weapon accounted for and fully functional. Schäffer used this as a sign of U-977's innocence, as it proved she hadn't fired on any vessels after the ceasefire. Yet if continued combat had not been her goal, why risk such a long journey? Did she have another mission that Schäffer was keeping hidden? More troubling still, U-977 appeared to have no charts of South America aboard. How had Schäffer navigated to this specific port without proper charts? He claimed the crew had simply memorized coordinates from books and manuals. It seemed an implausible explanation for such precise navigation across thousands of miles of ocean. Strangest of all was the arrival of U-530 in Mar del Plata the previous month. The appearance of one U-boat could have been written off as an anomaly, but a second one made it seem like there was some kind of coordinated plan. And if there was a plan, what was it? Could there be some truth in Szabo's theory after all? Word of the second submarine's arrival spread rapidly through international channels. The British and American governments, still looking into the circumstances around U-530's mysterious appearance, now demanded immediate access to U-977's crew. Schäffer recalled, quote, "I was conducted before a group of high Anglo-American officers who integrated an investigative commission specially sent to Argentina to put clear the, quote, mysterious case of the U-977. The Allied interrogators weren't taking any chances. If there was any grain of truth in the idea of the Führer being delivered to Argentina by U-boat, they were determined to discover it." Schäffer remembered, quote, "These gentlemen were obstinate. You've hidden Hitler. Tell us now, where is he?" The young U-boat commander stood firmly by his story. His crew had been alone. Nobody had left the submarine since the 16 men dropped off in Norway. As far as he knew, Hitler was no longer alive. The interrogations dragged on for months. Every detail of the U-977's voyage was scrutinized, cross-referenced with U-530's story, and compared against intelligence reports about Nazi escape routes. The Allies were convinced there had to be more to the story. 2 submarines at the same port couldn't be a coincidence. There had to be coordination, a plan, a purpose beyond simple escape. Schäffer's frustration mounted, quote, "As I could no longer tell them anything more than what I'd already declared to the Argentines, they became impatient as my submarine's trip continued to elicit lively comments and big headlines. But despite the intensity of the investigation, no concrete evidence emerged connecting either submarine to Hitler or any other high-ranking Nazi officials. In 1947, after nearly 2 years in Allied custody, Schäffer was finally released. He returned to Argentina, where he had first surrendered, and began building a new life far from the ruins of Germany. In 1952, he wrote a book retelling his version of his and his crew's famous transatlantic journey, U-977, 66 Days Underwater. He eventually passed away in Berlin in 1979 at the age of 57. But questions about what had really happened in summer 1945 persisted. Over the course of the decades that followed, it emerged that several top Nazi officials had escaped to South America after the war. Adolf Eichmann, one of the principal architects of the Holocaust, arrived in Buenos Aires in 1950, living freely for 10 years before Israeli agents captured him in 1960, leading to his trial and execution. Meanwhile, in the 1980s, it was revealed that Dr. Josef Mengele, the angel of death of Auschwitz, had passed away in Brazil in 1979, never having faced justice. The possibilities of other high-ranking members of the Third Reich having followed a similar path seem stronger than ever. Some conspiracy theorists even looked beyond South America. Certain researchers, including Szabo himself, pointed to Antarctica. Germany had conducted expeditions to the continent in the 1930s, claiming a vast territory they called Neuschwabenland, New Swabia. Rumors circulated that the Nazis had established a secret base there, perhaps even constructing facilities beneath the ice. According to these theories, U-boats like U-977 and 530 hadn't just been transporting people. They'd been carrying the Reich's most valuable assets to this hidden sanctuary. The party treasury, looted art and gold, classified documents detailing advanced weapons research, all of it supposedly ferried to Antarctica before Germany's final collapse. Some versions of the story even claim that a carefully selected group of engineers, scientists, and SS personnel had been sent there to preserve what Nazi ideologists called, quote, the Aryan gene pool. The submarine's long voyages, missing logbooks, and unexplained gaps in their stories seem to fit this narrative. If U-977 had stopped at an Antarctic base before continuing to Argentina, it would explain why the journey took so long and why Schäffer was so evasive about the exact route. While most historians dismissed these Antarctic theories as fantasy, they highlighted just how much mystery still surrounded the two submarines' journeys. If researchers couldn't definitively prove what the U-boats had been doing, then anything seemed possible. Meanwhile, closer investigation of the Argentine coastline itself would reveal evidence that seemed to support at least some clandestine activity. In 2007, Argentine filmmaker Lorenio Clavero and Spanish historian Pera Cardona began interviewing elderly residents of Mar del Sud, a sparsely populated coastal town about 40 miles from Mar del Plata. What they uncovered would breathe new life into decades-old conspiracy theories. One witness, Osvaldo Aramendi, recalled a stunning memory from 1945 when he was just 15 years old. He'd been in the sand dunes near the beach when a submarine conning tower suddenly broke the surface, approximately 500 feet from the shore. Curious locals gathered to watch the mysterious vessel, but it submerged again and disappeared. Days later, Aramendi learned that 2 German submarines had surrendered at Mar del Plata. Even more intriguing were the testimonies surrounding Carl Gustav Eichenberg, a wealthy German businessman who owned a large estate called El Ponavir in the Mar del Sud area. According to his daughters and granddaughter, Eichenberg had operated a clandestine network during the final months of the war. He allegedly hired a sailing vessel to meet submarines offshore, collect cargo and passengers, and transport them back to land under the cover of darkness. From there, trucks would carry the mysterious arrivals to his estate, where they would be hidden. Former workers at El Ponavir corroborated parts of this story. One witness, who'd been 10 years old at the time, recalled his cousin being sent to deliver food to a restricted area of the estate where, quote, foreign men were being kept. He was never allowed to see them directly, but overheard enough to understand they were Germans. The timeline was particularly suggestive. These sightings and activities occurred in the weeks immediately before U-530 and U-977 surrendered at Mar del Plata. Ankenberg was later arrested and imprisoned for a year, officially for minor infractions, but researchers suspected it was to silence him about what had really happened. Yet as intriguing as these conspiracy theories are, the likelihood of U-977 having been used to transport Hitler to Argentina seems to be minimal. First, there was the submarine itself. U-977 had been involved in at least 3 serious ramming incidents during training, with damage severe enough to her pressure hull that she'd been deemed unfit for combat operations. She'd spent nearly 2 years as a training boat. If German leadership had been planning a secret escape mission for their most important figures, would they really have chosen a damaged, accident-prone submarine that had never seen combat? Then there was her commander. Heinz Schäffer was just 24 years old and had never led a submarine into combat before. While he had experience as a watch officer, this was his first war patrol as a commander. German naval leadership had access to dozens of experienced, proven U-boat aces, commanders who had successfully evaded Allied forces for years and knew the Atlantic intimately. Entrusting their most important mission in Nazi history to an untested young officer would likely have been considered too risky. Even if U-530 or another U-boat had been used, the spring of 1945 was the deadliest period of the entire war for German submarines. Over 50% of U-boats that put to sea during these months never returned, hunted down by Allied aircraft and warships that now dominated the Atlantic. Would Nazi leadership really gamble Hitler's life on such perilous odds? Yet perhaps most damning of all is the timeline. U-977 left Germany on April 16th. Yet 4 days after this, on April 20th, Hitler's birthday, he was filmed receiving gifts and inspecting a guard of honor outside his bunker in Berlin. While it is technically possible that Hitler could have joined U-977 later, this would have involved crossing hundreds of miles of enemy-occupied territory, making it highly unlikely. It seems that in the end, U-977 had been exactly what Schäffer claimed, a group of young men trying to escape the harsh fate awaiting German prisoners of war, willing to risk a dangerous Atlantic crossing for the chance at freedom in South America.